until after 2001, when other folks like us decided it might be a good idea to be part of the storytelling that goes out over the airs, and I am so proud of our community for stepping in and stepping up. But even with that, it still looks like a mess out there, again and again, in the part of our planet that are, forgive me for saying this, that our colonized minds still call the Middle East. It is a mess. It is geographic West Asia. We're talking about the Eastern Mediterranean. We're talking about North Africa. And when we say those words, they have less charge on them, I would assert, than the term the Middle East. And that's going to be a slow change as well. I'm very glad to be here in a room with people with their sights set higher than the headlines. People that study and inquire and believe there's something better we may achieve together. I am very glad to be here with the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy because of the banner you have held for 25 years. Thank you very much. Asma, Radwan, and your team. Because it takes a lot of work to put together a conversation that lasts a day. Well, we've seen some change, and we'll be hearing about change and stagnation in this panel. Sitting with me here are Mustafa Akyol, Rebecca Ruth Gould, and Abadaddin Shaheen. We have all together seen language shift over the 25 years that CSID has been working. The generic Arab has become Iraqis, Palestinians, Tunisians. And we can thank the Iraq War. We can thank September 11th. We can thank Hamas, and we can thank the Arab Spring for letting the world know that there are distinct communities and cultures in the place we call the Middle East. The American public is now protesting American policy in Israel. That was unthinkable 25 years ago. It's a topic on Capitol Hill. Even the White House is wondering if there should be conditions on military aid. This is progress, my friends. But what difference does this make for democracy in North Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean, and West Asia? What difference does it make to the cultures and people that we love and cherish in those lands? This panel explores the Gaza-Israel war, implications for democracy in the Arab-Muslim world. And after we've heard from all our panelists, we will open up to you for questions and discussion. I'll introduce each panelist before he or she speaks, and we're going to start with Mustafa Akyol. The meaningful voice of Turkish journalist Mustafa Akyol came to my attention first in 2011 with his book, Islam Without Extremes, A Case for Muslim Liberty. Thank you. It was a very important, badly needed analysis at that time. Akyol has become a senior visiting fellow. He was at a time the senior visiting fellow at the Freedom Project at Wellesley College, which is my alma mater. And he's just signed my copy of his book, The Islamic Jesus. He's also written a book about the Islamic Moses. And most recently, we have Why, as a Muslim, I Defend Liberty. Prolific writer. Currently, Mr. Akyol is Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity, where he focuses on the intersection of public policy, Islam, and modernity. For over a decade, he's been a contributing writer of opinion to the New York Times. He also writes for Turkey's Hürriyet Daily News and almonitor.com. I suggest you also watch his TED Talk called Faith versus Tradition in Islam. He is a graduate of Boğaziçi University, located on the Bosphorus, Turkey. And his presentation today is called How Indifference to the Palestinian Suffering in Gaza is Alienating Moderates and Tarnishing the Appeal of Liberal Democratic Values.
Thank you so much, Elisa. Should I go there or here? Okay, that's better. Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, and thanks to the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy and my good old friends Asma and Radwan and all else who's been working for this event. It's really an honor. It's really an honor to see this event going for 22 years and be a part of it in these events and conferences. And it's a difficult time. It's been a difficult time in this whole 2 decades, but we have to keep up the right work, and you are doing so. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conference. Anissa, thank you so much for this very generous, kind introduction. I was humbled to hear. One correction, I don't write for Korea Daily News anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, it became one of the many proud does in Turkey, so
Well, you know, we struggle with accuracy.
You're welcome. No, that, I mean, probably it's there on YouTube or somewhere. But yeah, so I stopped writing for Turkish media because there's not much Turkish media left in Turkey. So but that's a long story in itself. There are some, if you independent newspapers, but mostly not. Okay, sure. So, and this is good. I don't need to do this as well. It's fine. Okay. Now, and I apologize that I'll have to leave early. I should say that too because I have a flight. Now,
Before the end of our panel?
I'll right after the end of our panel. I have to come. Now, my topic is how difference to Palestinian suffering in Gaza is alienating even the moderates and tarnishing the appeal of liberal democratic values in much of the Muslim world, especially the broader Middle East or Mashriq or the former Ottoman lands. Turkish journalist, wrote she's a columnist in Haber Türk, which is still a reasonable daily out there, and she's a popular Turkish journalist. And she wrote a notable piece on the suicide of the West. And she said, from now on, in this side of the world, who can refer to global values, Western liberal democracies? Who would listen to them, she said. Why would they listen? Now, Mrs. Karja is a friend of mine, I should say, and she's a pious Muslim who wears the hijab, but she's been also a political liberal. In Turkey, liberalism and Islamic sentiments converged often, and those were the best times of Turkey, like the early 2000s. It's not there that much anymore. But she's supported Turkey's accession to the European Union and all the political reforms aligned with that. So she was not happy that the West is committing a suicide as she saw it. She was actually sad that the source of humanitarian values, the rule of law, human rights that Turkey often referred to by looking at the European Union and its courts and all that was losing its own credibility in a way. Now, if you've been following the Muslim world and opinions there, including opinions among Muslim communities in the West, you will see that Nihal Sukarija is not the only person who thinks like that these days. In the past 6 months, there has been unprecedented amount of comments and expressions of disappointment and anger and resentment against Western governments because of what's happening in Gaza and the position that these governments have taken. And these are not typically anti-Western people who are illiberal in their ideologies, hardline Islamists or communists or other groups. These are the people who actually looked at Western civilization, Western norms, governments, EU, UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, typically cherished by Western governments. And there has been a great, unprecedented, I think, disappointment in the hypocrisy and the double standard in the application of these principles. Another example, which I quoted in a recent article in Foreign Policy, was a message by a Mauritanian professor of philosophy, Mustafa Akyol, which went viral on Arab social media. He said, "I've become ashamed before my students, whom I have thought over decades, the Enlightenment and modern Western philosophies," the professor wrote. He apologized for glorifying Western notions like humanism, progress, and liberty. Then he added, "The West is the biggest lie that history has known." Now, the reasons for these sentiments is obvious. In the past 6 months, Muslims around the world have seen on YouTube, on TikTok, on live television, that Palestinians, more than 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, have gone through hell on earth, as a UN spokesman has said. While many Western governments, especially the US government, seem indifferent to their death and destruction, if not even complicit in its making. They've seen thousands of Palestinian children being killed by Israeli bombs, while more and more US dollars and weapons were being granted to the far-right Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu to continue the campaign. So, but why did this happen? People have different arguments about this, so I'll say a few things on that. Of course, I mean, to ask why are we going through this would take us back to 100 years ago, the post-Arab Middle East and the beginning of the conflicts between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which, as Jews and Arabs, lived peacefully for centuries before the modern ways of nationalism descended in the Middle East. But that's a long story. I'll just say a few things about how the current escalation began. It began in October 7th, as we all know. On that date, a large group of gunmen from Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups breached the border and entered into Israeli territory. They killed, terrorized, and kidnapped innocent civilians, violating not just international humanitarian law, but also age-old Islamic law. Because as various Muslim scholars, including our good friend Asma Afsaruddin have very likely shown, Islamic law allows war as just war in certain circumstances, but it never allows targeting non-combatants in war, that is women, children, monks, elderly, and so on and so forth. So I'm among those people that who think that October 7 violated that Islamic value of not targeting non-combatants, so it had to be condemned, as various prominent Islamic scholars readily did after October 7. However, soon after October 7, the Israeli military initiated a campaign of not just surgical strikes against Hamas and affiliated groups, but a collective punishment on the whole Gaza Strip. With indiscriminate bombing, as even the US President Joe Biden, who supported the campaign, said in passing without being shocked by it for some unfathomable reason. So whole neighborhoods, mosques, churches, hospitals, cemeteries, schools, and university buildings have been destroyed. As of today, more than 30,000 people in Gaza, most of them women and children, have been killed. Even in the occupied West Bank, which is calmer, over 460 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli soldiers or radical settlers in the past 6 months. Now, this is the burning question. Why many influential people in the West have been rightly horrified by the atrocities of October 7, but they're not horrified by the much larger scale of atrocities that has happened afterwards. In other words, why do they support a war on terror that kills dozens of times more civilians than terrorism itself? There's endless spinning and propaganda lines about this, but I think to many people around the world, especially the Muslim world, the answer seems painfully obvious. In the West, Israeli lives matter more, much more, than Palestinian lives. And that naturally comes as a historic denial of the liberal values that the Western governments have championed since the end of World War II. Universal human rights, the inherent dignity of all human life. One can say that these lofty ideals were never fully pursued. There was always some hypocrisy and alliances and national interest that got in the way. But for many people, those double standards were never this blatant, this much in your face. For worse, there's another glaring double standard that has become very clear in the past 6 months. That is about the very important value that we call freedom of speech. We see Western governments, especially France, seem very vocal about defending free speech when it comes to certain issues like blasphemy against religion. And I think that, yes, freedom of speech should be valued and blasphemy laws should be abolished elsewhere around the world and so on and so forth. But when it comes to pro-Palestinian expressions, we've seen Western governments cracking down very heavily, especially across Europe. In Germany, which seems to have lost its mind, German authorities are acting like a typical authoritarian state, banning peaceful protests, silencing critical speakers, even banning keffiyehs and the mere slogan "Free Palestine." Now, all of this is rapidly discrediting the West and all its liberal values and narratives in the eyes of the rest. For if human rights are not valid for all humans, and if freedom of speech is not valid for all opinions, those principles don't mean much. The world instead seems to run on the cynical principle defined by Carl Schmitt, the crown jurist of the Third Reich, the enemy of liberalism. Sovereign powers at their will can define the exception to their rules. Rules only matter if they are avowal powers, including the most powerful ones. So, for some people who always despise liberalism and wanted better other alternatives, this might be a good news, heralding order. I don't think like that, because I worry what's coming. I would worry that such a post-liberal world would be a scary place, as flawed as the so-called liberal order is. As Western democracies cast aside their principles, illiberal forces, such as Russia and China and Iran, would gain more power and prestige all around the world, including the Muslim world. Also, new militant groups can emerge in the Muslim world, even more violent and brutal than the ones that we have seen. Because don't forget, jihadism, that is fueled by the perception that the Muslims are under attack. And that will certainly be fueled by what's happening in Gaza. So this could even lead to worse conflicts that we have seen before, even now a clash of civilizations. So it's pretty late now, but still before it gets worse. The Biden administration must change course. They've been silently and slowly changing course to some extent, but that's not enough. Right? They should push for an immediate ceasefire and permanent ceasefire. Urgent relief for Gaza's much tormented people. And a clear path to a political solution. And not a political solution between Israel and third parties, Arab countries in the Gulf, which are not that relevant, but a political solution between Israelis and the Palestinians, the key issue which has been mistakenly ignored for a long time. In other words, Western governments should show to the world that the lives and dreams of Palestinian children are as precious as those of Israeli children. Otherwise, all the liberal narratives about human rights and all that will really not convince anyone in the world anymore. Before ending, I'll just like to say two more things also to fellow Muslims around the world today, here, elsewhere, who's listening to us, who feel for the Palestinians as myself do. Let's not also forget, in the meantime, that not everyone who seem to champion the Palestinian cause may be really that humane in their approach. They include the current regimes of Syria and Iran. Do they really care about Palestinian children? Well, we know their record from what they did to the children of Daraa or Aleppo. So they might have their own geostrategic games, but I think we should not be misled by their propaganda. We also know the humanitarian records of Russia to what it did in Chechnya, let alone Ukraine, and China, from those to the Uyghurs. Second, the West, we sometimes see as a monolith. It's not. Even Western governments are not monolithic. We've seen that in the past couple of months. And also, West is not just about its government, it's about civil society, it's about media, it's about NGOs, it's about really people who do care about human rights. And we've seen those groups and peoples and individuals and politicians in the West in the past 6 months who come out and ask for a ceasefire and criticize the current campaign and ask for relief and humanitarian aid. They call for peace and justice. So I think that's the silver lining in this conflict. And I think those people show us that there are indeed universal values
of inherent dignity of all human life, the innocence of every children, justice for everyone, not just one group over the other. And we can still, yes, aspire for those universal values, cultivate them on all sides, on our side and the other side. And yes, we can, I think, still aspire for a better world with more peace, freedom, justice, and prosperity for all. Thank you very much.